First of all, I want to say to my colleague from Missouri that I certainly share, I think every senator in this chamber shares his concern for people who are hurting because of this COVID pandemic. Businesses have closed, people are on unemployment, people are in need through no fault of their own. This was an act of God, and that's one of the reasons why I certainly supported the CARES Act. That was over $2 trillion. In total, this body has passed well over $3 trillion, 15 to 16% of last year's GDP in terms of financial relief. My comments here are really not directed specifically at the senator from Missouri's proposal, because he makes many good points. We do have working men and women. We have households that, again, through no fault of their own, are struggling, and we need to provide financial support. I think my comments are, in some respect, more general from a standpoint of how we've done that. And as I've explained to my colleagues in conference, by and large, the initial relief packages here were a shotgun approach. Now, we had to move fast. We had to do something big. We had to make sure that markets wouldn't seize, that financial relief could be sent to people very quickly. And so we passed over $3 trillion in financial relief. I knew it would be far from perfect. It was far from perfect. But now we've had a lot more time. And anything we consider for this additional package that we're considering now, that's being debated, that's being discussed, that's being negotiated, ought to be far more targeted. One of the reasons we are currently $27.4 trillion in debt, which is about 128% of last year's GDP. If we do this bipartisan deal, another $1 trillion, we'll be $28.4 trillion in debt in the next 3 or 4 months. That's 132% of GDP. When I came to the Senate, we were a little over $14 trillion. Our GDP was over $15 trillion. We're actually below 100% of GDP. Now, I know I'm using a lot of numbers right now, and I'm going to use more because that's part of the problem, and one of the reasons we are $27.4 trillion in debt is we only speak about need, we only talk in terms of compassion. We all have compassion. We all want to fulfill those needs. We just don't talk in numbers very often. We don't analyze the data. We don't take a look at what we did in the past and see, did it work or didn't it work? What was spent well? What was wasted? So I didn't have enough time to do charts. It'd be a little bit easier. So let me go through some numbers, and I'll go through slowly so people can understand at least my perspective of why I'm so concerned about our nation's debt, the fact that we are mortgaging our children's future. And I think we need to be very careful about mortgaging it further when we aren't doing it in a targeted fashion. So again, before the COVID recession hit, in December 2019, we hit a record number of people employed in this country. 158.8 million people were employed. That was a record. Our economy was humming because President Trump's administration put forward a reasonable level of regulation and a competitive tax system. That brought back entrepreneurial spirit. That supercharged our economy. We were at 3.5% unemployment. When I took econ, 5% was considered full employment. We were at 3.5% unemployment. Then COVID hit. And by April, we'd gone from almost 159 million people employed in this country to just a little over 133 million people. So that was a reduction in employment of a little more than 25 million people. Again, from 159 to 133, 25 million people less employed in this nation. Now, the good news, even though the pandemic's still not over, but the vaccine's being delivered, it's being administered, I think the end is in sight, we've already gained 16 million people employed. So now employment stands at 149.7 million people. 150 million people are employed, down to about 9 million jobs. 9 million. Okay? So I want you to keep those numbers in mind because they're important. And our unemployment rate stands at 6.7%. By the way, number of people unemployed, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics is a little bit different calculations, about 10.7. So we're in this, somewhere between 9 and 11 million people are currently unemployed. Now, in the CARES Act, again, which I supported because we had to provide relief, we did provide economic impact payments, what Senator Hawley wants to just duplicate. No changes, no modifications, no further targeting. What those economic impact payments were is about $275 billion to 166 million people. And remember, 25 million people lost their jobs. We sent out checks to 166 million people, averaging about $1,673 per person. What's maybe a more relevant figure is how many households did we send those checks to? We sent them out to about 115 million households, about $2,400 per household. So again, $275 billion to 115 million households. Now that was about 4.5 more households than the number of jobs lost. Today, with only 9 million jobs lost, not only, I mean, that's a big number, it's a big number, okay? I'm not minimizing that, but with 9 million jobs lost, if we just repeat it, send it out to another 115 million households, that's 12.6 times the number of jobs lost. And if we double it, it goes from $275 billion to $550 billion. That's a $500 billion. And I know a trillion doesn't sound like much anymore. Seems like hundreds of billions seem more, but now we're dealing in $1 or $2 trillion. It's pocket change apparently. I think it's important to ask, well, how was that money spent? Was it really spent on essentials? Was this money really needed? Was there any hope of actually that money being stimulative to our economy? Well, we have one study from the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. They issued it on October 13th of 2020. What they did is, since 2013, they've been sending out an internet national survey to 1,300 households called the Survey of Consumer Expectations. And with COVID, they decided to send out 2 special surveys, one in June and one in August. And here's what those survey results said. Of the $2,400 per household in the June survey, 18% of that $275 billion was spent on essential items. 8% was spent on non-essential. 3% on donations. For a total of 29% spent is what they call the marginal propensity to consume, 29%. The other 71%, equally divided, 36% of that was saved, so our nation's savings rate has increased, and 35% went to pay off debt, credit card debt. They also asked the same question of what happened to the unemployment payments. Very similar results. 24% of those unemployment payments, the plus up to $600 per week to state unemployment benefits, 24% was spent on essential consumption, 4% on non-essential, 1% on donations. For again, the same percentage, 29% was the marginal propensity to consume from the unemployment payments, 71% for savings and for debt repayment. Now, they've also looked ahead, assuming that we're going to do another round of stimulus checks. This time they asked their respondents, how would you spend $1,500 if you got a check? This time the respondents said they'd spend about 14% on essential consumption, 7% on non-essential, 3% on donations, for a total of 24% would be the marginal propensity to consume, 24%. 76% again on savings and debt repayment. So I don't think you can take a look at these direct payments to individuals as stimulative. Obviously, 18 to 24% is spent on essential items. We ought to figure out how to provide that money so that people can spend it on essentials. Again, that's only 18 to 24% maximum.